This is a true story, happening to me around 1984, one of the many adventures I have experienced while off-roading and exploring the desert Southwest. It seems like when things don't quite go as planned, when one may be frightened, uncomfortable, or inconvenienced, remembering back on those events, those are the most memorable adventures to have, the ones that stick vividly in your mind for the rest of your life. I know this is a long story, but if you are able to read it in its entirety, give me a like, or better yet, a comment. As my memory recalls, a friend of mine and I came up with this idea to ride dirt bikes out to an old mining camp known as Old Hachita, located about 110 miles west of El Paso where we lived. The plan was to pack our camping gear into backpacks and ride various back roads and trails on our motorcycles across the desert to the ghost town where we would camp overnight, then ride back the next day. Though most of the trip was to be ridden on back dirt roads, an occasional stretch of paved highway was necessary. It didn't matter that our motorcycles were not street legal, that was all part of the challenge. The day we left, it started out as a sunny winter day, but a cold front was expected later in the day and rain was in the forecast. That didn't really matter because we planned on camping inside one of the old buildings at the ghost town and most of our gear was waterproof anyway. We spent most of the day getting to the village of Hachita, the last point of civilization before we were to ride the final 7 miles up into the Little Hatchet Mountains to the abandoned mining camp. Upon arriving in Hachita, we stopped at the Fina station to top off our gas tanks and get something to eat. After filling up our tanks, we noticed the wind and dust starting to pick up as the cold front was beginning to pass through. We were sitting on our bikes in the parking lot, discussing our plans and how the weather was going to affect us. At that time, a faded red Ford truck pulls into the parking lot. 2 individuals got out and went into the little store. A few minutes later they came out, stood by the door talking to each other for a few seconds and then walked over to us. We figured that these guys were just local ranch hands hanging out in town on a slow Saturday afternoon. Then one of the guys walked up to my friend and started talking to him. The other one came up to me. The creepy thing about the guy that came over to me was that for a total stranger, the guy was standing really close, like 2 feet away as he was talking to me. I felt for a stranger, this was well within my personal space, and it made me nervous. He started talking about my bike and how he always wanted one like it and kept asking questions about it. Another weird thing about this guy was that as he was talking to me, as I looked into his eyes, they seemed to be blank, meaning that I could not detect a soul behind those cold blue eyes. Something felt really evil about this guy. This conversation went on for a few minutes and finally I told him we needed to go as it was getting late in the afternoon, the weather was turning, and we still had a distance to travel. My friend later tells me that he had a very similar conversation and experienced the same look in the eyes of the guy talking to him. We sat there for a couple of minutes watching these 2 guys get in their truck and head down the highway out of town. We figured that these guys were gone for good and decided to head over to the Hachita Mercantile and General Store to get a hot sandwich before riding out to Old Hachita for the night. This place was a small grocery store with a couple of picnic tables in the corner where you could sit and eat microwaved sandwich and such. As we are sitting there finishing up our food, I glanced out the window and see that damned red Ford truck pull into the parking lot. I guess they came back and saw our bikes sitting out front. The 2 guys jumped out of their truck, came inside, and started talking to the clerk, whom they seemed to know. After a minute or so, they walk over to us, sat down at the table next to us and started asking where we're heading. Not wanting to disclose that we were heading to the mining camp of Old Hachita, I told them we were heading down south into the Boot Heel country and the Big Hatchet Mountains. One of the guys mentioned that there was a neat ghost town a few miles west of there. I didn't want the guy to know that was where we were heading, so I played it down and told them we were still heading south, but maybe when we returned, we would check it out. They told us they had to run, and they got up, said later to the clerk, and left. I told my buddy that I didn't have a good feeling about these guys and had to lie about our destination so they wouldn't try to follow us. His thoughts were the same. We sat there finishing our sandwiches and watched that red truck head down highway toward I-10 and Lordsburg. It was around 4 p.m. by now, not much daylight left and getting pretty chilly outside. The skies were darkening and threatening to rain as the storm was approaching. The clerk mentioned a chance of snow that night, so we figured we best head out to Old Hachita to get our camp set up before conditions got any worse. With the two guys in their red truck long gone, we figured our troubles were over, got on the bikes and headed west to Old Hachita. We arrived at the old mining camp and thankfully had the whole place to ourselves, a peaceful solitude under overcast skies. The wind had subsided, and a light rain began to fall. We found an old building with a fairly stable roof and laid out our sleeping bags on the floor, then scavenged the desert for brush and sticks to build a small campfire for warmth. Sitting next to the fire, cozy in our little building enjoying the peacefulness of the desert, the only sound to be heard was the crackle of the fire and the sound of the raindrops hitting the tin roof of the building we were in. As we sat there, the conversation came up about those two guys and what we thought they were up to. They seemed to be way too friendly for strangers, and it still bothered me that the guy I initially spoke to didn't seem to have a soul when looking into his eyes. Something was wrong with these guys and we both felt that they were up to no good. Thinking back, I still feel their motive was to hit us over the head and toss us into one of the many open mineshafts in the area, never to be seen again, and steal our motorcycles. About then, we heard a rumble of a vehicle heading up the dirt road from the highway. Not really wanting other visitors around, we watched the road. Soon we see a vehicle, and as it got closer, we were able to identify it as that damned red Ford truck. Shoot, how did they possibly know we would be here, and why are they following us? We stood there as they pulled up next to us and got out. My friend puts his hand inside his jacket where he had a .45 pistol in his pocket, just in case. One of the guys said, "Oh, I see you found the place." I replied, "Yes, we decided to take your advice and come here, especially since it was closer, and the weather was getting worse." The other guy asked us if we liked to party. I said sure, not knowing what else to say. He asked if we had any beer and we said no. Then they volunteered to go back to town to pick up a couple cases of beer and come back. I replied awesome. What else could I say? They hopped in their truck and headed toward the highway to Hachita. My friend and I looked at each other and we thought, no way in hell are we going to let these guys get us drunk out here. Here is our chance to pack up our shit and get out of here. We spent the next 15 minutes packing up our stuff and loading up the bikes. It was almost totally dark at this point and a light rain was still falling. My bike had a headlight on it, but it was on all the time as long as the engine was running. My friend's bike had no lights at all, so he had to follow me and use my light to see the trail. We started heading down the road toward the highway and then we see the headlights of that truck as they were returning. It was pulling off the highway onto the dirt road we were on. This was the only road out of there and we did not want to pass them, so the only choice we had was to turn around and head uphill beyond the mining camp and up Howell's Ridge in the foothills of the Little Hatchet Range. We rode as far up the trail as we could, shut off our engines so my headlight wouldn't be shining. We just sat there in the cold rain watching the headlights of that red truck as it made its way along the dirt road to the mining camp. We were maybe a mile away, so there was virtually no way they could see us or know we were up there. We just waited. They would have to give up and leave soon. We saw them shining a spotlight around all the old buildings and structures, and then they drove around a hill to another part of the mining camp, but they wouldn't leave. We saw this as our chance to leave. We didn't want to start our engines because of my headlight and because of the noise of the engines, so since we were above the mining camp, we just coasted downhill, hoping we would not hit any big rocks or washouts. We rolled right past the old mining camp and at that point, still rolling, we put our bikes in gear, popped the clutch, and started our engines. Now with my headlight on, we could see where we were going, and we hauled ass to the highway. At the highway, there was a cattle guard and a gate that had to be opened. As I stopped to open the gate, looking back, I see the headlights of that truck, heading toward us, maybe a mile away. Not sure if they saw us, or if they were just leaving anyway, but they were traveling pretty fast down that dirt road toward us. We passed through the gate, wrapping the chain around it to make it more difficult to open, and headed east along Highway 9 toward Hachita. My speedometer read about 60 miles per hour as we rode along the highway in the rain. Didn't feel safe going much faster. We had good waterproof jackets, helmets, gloves, and goggles, so it wasn't bad. I kept looking back and the lights of the truck seemed to be getting closer, maybe half a mile back there now. We blew past the town of Hachita, which at this time of the night was shut down. Onward to Columbus, another 45 miles away. Just east of Hachita, the pavement ended, and the road turned to dirt. It was about 10 p.m. by now and not a soul out there but us and this damn truck. We had to slow down a bit because the rain was causing mud puddles to pool up on the road and the dirt was getting a little slick. The truck seemed to be maintaining its distance, but we were still pushing it. As we arrived in Columbus, same thing, everything shut down. It seems like these little towns shut off their lights and roll up their sidewalks after dark. Then, just east of Columbus, heading for El Paso, we spotted 2 Border Patrol units on the side of the road. We stopped and told them our story. Pointed out the headlights of the truck behind us. One agent told us to continue on to El Paso and they would take care of it. He jumped in his unit, turned his flashing red lights on and headed for that red truck. We headed another 15 miles east across the desert toward El Paso, never looking back to see what happened, but the truck wasn't following us anymore. It was getting late, we were exhausted and didn't feel like riding the 60 miles to El Paso that night, so we decided to stop at the windmill at the old railroad station of Arena and camp for the night. We just laid our sleeping bags on the wet sand under the windmill and draped a sheet of plastic over ourselves to keep dry and fell asleep to the sound of raindrops hitting our plastic sheets and the rickety windmill squeaking as its blades rotated in the wind.